at one level, the Navy is kind of saddled with the MiG-29K because it's not a new generation aircraft. It has been sort of restricted by what can only be described as major serviceability and maintenance issues. The hard truth of the MiG-29K is that it is simply not the optimal frontline fighter for a navy of the kind that the Indian Navy has become in the last 10 years. Okay. The kind of navy that has responsibilities that go way beyond its own waters. The fact that the Rafale has been chosen for the Navy as well, despite all the politics that was played over the Rafale in the 2019 election campaign, shows that the government, has taken a very strategic, hard stance not to bow to politics when it comes to defense deals, which is in my view a very good thing, because politics only benefits the companies, it never benefits the country. The simple reason is the Air Force would not ever deign to share negotiating space with the Navy. Okay?
Wow.
I will take what shit comes my way for having said this, and anyone who wants to argue back with me, I will eat it. If you have a museum of fighters, and the entire point of trying to economize and make in India and create capacity here in India is about commonality and saving costs and bang for your buck and all those wonderful things, then why is there even a contest?
Yes, exactly. Hello and welcome to the 29th episode of In Our Defense. Hi Shiv, how are you?
All good. 29 episodes already.
Yeah.
Difficult to believe.
Yes. And I'm pretty sure we'll reach 100 very, very soon. Right. So what do we want to talk about this week? Let's talk about the Rafale jet. If you can see it in the frame. I was in Chandigarh, I think, last weekend. And there's a museum that was opened, I think, a year ago. Air Force Heritage Museum, got it from there. But that's not the reason we're talking about it. And that's not the reason I got it, actually. We'll talk about the Naval Rafale and the Navy's fighter jet, let's not say program, but the fleet, etc., because that's something that people not generally talk about. When you say fighter jets, you just associate with the Air Force and the legacy problems we faced. We've spent, I think, 2-3 episodes talking about the Air Force's issues with its fighter jet fleets, the Tejas, the Rafale that the Air Force has, and I think this episode, let's talk about the Navy. Before we get into what Navy wants from a fighter jet and what's happening with the Rafale deal for the Navy, can you explain briefly the difference between an Air Force fighter jet and a Naval fighter jet? Because on the looks of it, they kind of look similar. But how different are they? Because obviously they operate from different decks. I mean, one, you operate from land, you have a longer runway, you have space to do much more, while the naval jets obviously operate from a very, very thin strip. So when it comes to the avionics of the fighter jet, when it comes to the structure of the fighter jet, how different is a naval fighter jet from an Air Force fighter jet?
This is one of my favorite topics, and if you remember, Dave, this is a topic on which we've both gotten into trouble in the past. One notorious episode where we were both talking about naval pilots versus Air Force pilots, and I can tell you that even now my social media will always have a few mentions every single day on Instagram and on Twitter on that one episode. I can't remember which one it is, but we'll link it in the description, where we had it out over who do we prefer, naval pilots or Air Force pilots. If you guys have missed that, go and check that out.
Definitely.
It's a detailed discussion on what that is. But the reason why Dave and I have come back to it today is because of the Indian Navy's deal that's being negotiated right now, Dave, for 26 Rafale maritime fighter jets for its aircraft carriers. Now, as our viewers already know, the Indian Air Force currently operates 2 squadrons of Rafales, the Air Force version of the Rafale, which operates from conventional runways. These are 36 in all, which are currently deployed in 2 squadrons. One is based in Ambala in Haryana, that takes care of your northern sectors, and one based in Hashimara in West Bengal, which takes care of your the eastern sector, China, etc. So two squadrons of Rafales already in operation, in service, active, flying every day, conducting weapons testing, all of that for the last few years. So that's part A of the answer. Part B is the Indian Navy now needs new fighter jets to operate off its aircraft carriers. It currently, as many people know, the Indian Navy currently has 2 aircraft carriers on which they operate, the MiG-29K fighter jets, which are your operational your standard fighter jet for the Navy is the MiG-29K. But the Indian Navy has been for a long time looking for a new generation, more capable fighter jet, and they've been casting their eyes on the West, which is also quite well known. They want to move away from Russian stuff and go towards slightly higher quality, better quality Western equipment. So that's where the Rafale comes into the picture. Now, so that's we'll talk about those negotiations in a bit. But to answer your question, an Air Force fighter and a naval fighter, on the surface, they don't look very different. Obviously, they look very similar. They conduct, for most part, pretty similar operations. There's a quite a bit of overlap in terms of what each of the fighters can do, but obviously there are very, very big and fundamental differences between the two. The most obvious being that an Air Force fighter is built to operate from the kind of runway you see in any airport, and a naval fighter, which can do the same thing. It can operate from any runway, of course, but its specialized task is to operate off an aircraft carrier deck, which is a ship deck, which, like you rightly pointed out, is a tiny little runway on a pitching and rolling ocean. So it's a very, very difficult and confined space on which to actually land and operate an aircraft. And because this fundamental difference, the aircraft are engineered quite differently. The landing dynamics, the takeoff dynamics, they're all vastly different. Even though the aerodynamics and the general way in which these aircraft fly are exactly the same, the engine is exactly the same. The undercarriage is vastly different because these aircraft have to land on tiny surfaces, of a rolling and pitching runway, which is literally not staying in one place. There are many features on these aircraft that make them different. They are specifically designed from scratch in order to land in a much harder way and not have the kind of smooth, gentle landing that you have on a runway, on a normal land runway. They are launched through a catapult launch. They don't have a takeoff roll. They are literally thrown into the air using steam energy or nuclear energy in the case of the American aircraft carriers. And they land using a trapping mechanism where they have a tail hook which basically traps on one of 3 or 4 wire arresting cables that are there on the ship. So apart from the landing and takeoff mechanism, obviously, because of where these aircraft operate, the mission profiles are slightly different. Even though these aircraft can be armed identically in a very similar way, these aircraft that operate on ships typically are used for fleet defense, for fleet air defense, to defend the entire fleet. They can conduct anti-ship operations. They can conduct, intelligence gathering operations out at sea. There are obviously also some engineering differences, Dave, in terms of navalized aircraft. So, navalizing an aircraft basically also means using materials that give the aircraft the capacity to operate in extremely saline weather and saline conditions. Salt is a corrosive. Salt is something we eat every day, but it's also an extreme corrosive. Salty sea air, which is rich in salt-drenched humidity, has a very corrosive effect on metals and materials, and therefore naval aircraft have to be built with materials that are capable of withstanding that kind of thing and not quickly being eroded or rusting away. So all of these differences make naval aircraft different from aircraft. So these are also basically therefore the differences between the Air Force Rafale, which we operate, and the Naval Rafale, which we are negotiating to operate now.
Yeah. All right. So tell us about what's the scene with the Indian Navy's fighter fleet. So because like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that historically the media is always focused on the Air Force's depleting fleet, but if you look at Navy's fighter numbers, even those aren't that great. I mean, there's no official full number out there, but I think they have around 40 MiG-29Ks that operate from both Vikrant and Vikramaditya. Both the ships, by the way, have a full capacity of around, I think, 72 aircraft. This also includes space for some helicopters.
Yeah.
So I would guess maybe the two together would have space for, let's say, 60, 62 maybe fighter jets. So the Navy is under the fleet, and the naval fighter fleet is not up to the mark they would require. remember that Navy also is looking for a third aircraft carrier, another version of INS Vikrant, which was commissioned a couple of years ago. Why have we never talked about Indian Navy's depleting fighter squadron strength? And what's the scene with the Sukhoi that the Navy has right now? Is the Navy just like, done with it? Are they really, really old? And is that the reason that we are looking for a new modern aircraft?
So, your question is going to actually gladden the hearts of the Navy and naval aviators, which is because it's a question that they have asked in a small voice from the sidelines amidst the blaring narrative of squadron depletions of the Air Force, and the Navy, which feels, sidelined on the best of days, is like, "Arey, hamara kya? What about our fighter numbers? We don't exactly have healthy fighter numbers, or quality or quantity." So they have a major problem. Now, the truth of the matter is the Navy has struggled because of a variety of reasons. Its current fleet is entirely dominated by one type of fighter aircraft, which is the MiG-29K, which operates off the INS Vikramaditya aircraft carrier, and it's also conducted some landings on the INS Vikrant, and will be soon fully operational, I'm told. Now the MiG-29K, let's make no mistake, MiG-29K is a terrific piece of aircraft. It's a fighter that pilots love. It's a fighter aircraft that the Navy has appreciated. It chose the MiG-29K for most part, even though there's a backstory. I'll tell you about that also in a little while. But the fact is, at one level, the Navy is kind of saddled with the MiG-29K because it's not a new generation aircraft. It has been sort of restricted by what can only be described as major serviceability and maintenance issues. Like you rightly pointed out, 45 was the number that we'd purchased. 5 have been lost in accidents and been written off in various incidents. That's not abnormal. That happens in military operations. So there are 40, roughly 2 squadrons of MiG-29Ks that are currently operational. The hard truth of the MiG-29K is that it is simply not the optimal frontline fighter for a navy of the kind that the Indian Navy has become in the last 10 years.
Okay.
The kind of navy that has responsibilities that go way beyond its own waters, that has responsibilities that now are part of Quad and Malabar, a rising, China, the South China Sea, where you now have allies, in the South China Sea countries, etc. And therefore, you need you need assets and weapons and aircraft which are many degrees more capable than your kind of bread and butter fighters. The great thing about Soviet fighters, and the MiG-29K is a Soviet origin fighter, is that they do the job. They will do the job. But the point is, the Indian Navy and the Indian military in general need military hardware and aircraft, especially, that do much more than the job, because air power in the Indian context, especially in the last 10 years, has gone from being tactical, which is causing effects in your immediate neighborhood, to causing much more strategic effects, sending out power projection to areas way beyond the horizon line, to be able to tell the region that you are the number one force in the region, and that a country like China, which is unpredictable, that has been had this runaway kind of capacity aggression in its navy, cannot be trusted to govern these waters in a fair manner, and therefore India is that counterbalancing force. Now, obviously, a strong navy is more than just aircraft carriers and aircraft. That is just one out of a million things that need to happen for the Navy to sort of step up into that big role that the world expects of it. But aircraft carriers and aircraft do play a very significant part. Maybe one in a million, but it's still a very, very important and indispensable part. And therefore, the MiG-29K simply don't cut it. The good news is that the Indian Navy had realized this quite early on. I'm sure we'll do an entirely separate offshoot episode on the INS Vikramaditya, which was earlier called the Admiral Gorshkov. And like many things in the Indian military, it was something that the Indian Navy sort of didn't really have a choice with. The Admiral Goshkov came with
Oh,
MiG
wow.
29K fighters, so they didn't really have a choice in terms of. I mean, a bit of a bit of a play was made in terms of whether they could choose fighters, but ultimately it came down to Russia saying, "Look, with this aircraft, this is the fighter that works. So
Wow.
these are the fighters you'll have to take." So they were actually, practically the aircraft were even developed and navalized using Indian money. So it's another one of those kind of 50 Shades of Grey kind of tales, and we'll get into that on another occasion. But the simple fact of the matter is now the Indian Navy is clear that it needs to move beyond the MiG 29K, and that's where the Rafale comes in.
Yeah, I love that nugget about how the fighters came with the carrier.
Yeah.
Because when I was researching for this episode, I realized that the Russia does not even use MiG-29Ks. They have, I think, recently placed an order because I think they use, I think, the Su-33, if I'm
Yeah.
not wrong.
Correct.
But those are retiring, so now they're like, "Acha, ye MiG-29 थोड़े use कर लेते." But imagine a country developing a fighter jet for its for a navy and then not even placing orders for
Yeah.
them, and they're giving it to
Like they don't
us.
use the BrahMos.
Yes. Right. So I think that's a good idea. We should do a separate episode on that. I think a separate episode on Russia,
Yeah, yeah.
actually. Russia and
Oh,
what
country
India's done for
episodes are
us.
coming up for sure in this season.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about the Rafale that the Navy is negotiating for. I think the best way to describe it would be in your previous answer, what you said. And I think previously in one of the episodes, you spoke about how the Rafale is basically a weapon that is meant not to be used, because if India has to use a Rafale, that means
Yeah.
war is coming. So it's kind of a deterrent force, which is exactly what you said the Navy is looking for, which is what the MiG-29K does not give the Navy right
Correct.
now. So tell us about the Rafale M, the naval variant for which negotiations are going on right now. We'll talk about the bureaucracy of that after the break, perhaps, but about the jet. What the Navy wants from the jet. Are we also looking for, like we did with the Air Force deal, some modifications to kind of suit our needs, the domain that we operate in, the aircraft carrier that we have? For example, I think we have the ramp takeoff and not the steam one that you kind of described earlier in this episode. So what are we looking for? I think we're looking for around a deal of around 50,000 crore for, like you said, 26, of which 4 would be for two-seater trainers and 22 would be single-seaters. So what are we looking for? Where is the deal right now? And how soon do you expect it to get closed? Because we've been talking about this deal, by the way, for a couple of years now.
So the Indian Navy's quest for new generation deck-based fighters has been on for the better half of a decade now, better part of a decade, in fact more than that. It has gone through many different avatars. The original number was looking for 57 aircraft. When it was realized that this is an unmanageably large number, when you don't even have the aircraft carrier to justify that number, that it was whittled down to just 26 aircraft. Now 26 is by no means a small number; it's still a big number. It's basically about 2 small squadrons. But the Navy is happy with that because the Navy actually sees the Rafale as something of a stopgap. Now, we'll come back to the problems with this whole stopgap concept that we have in the Indian military, which has been the root cause of many different problems. But that may be also for another episode, but I'll touch upon that. Now, the Rafale M is obviously, it's a naval fighter. Fun fact, the Rafale M came before the Rafale Air Force version.
Wow.
So when the Rafale was built, the Rafale was actually built as a naval fighter. And then it spawned an Air Force version, which is actually the easier way to do things. Because when you build a naval fighter and you need to spin off an Air Force land version, you're actually simplifying the jet. But if you do it in reverse, which many other people have, you're actually complicating the jet because you have to re-engineer many parts of it. So the Rafale M came before the before the vanilla Rafale that the Air Force uses. That's one small thing, not important, but it's important in terms of how we are looking at the Rafale now. So the Rafale M has only one customer right now, and that's the French Navy. They operated off one aircraft carrier, that's the Charles de Gaulle. But that one aircraft carrier, that one group, and I've visited the home of the Rafale in northwestern France in a place called Landivisiau many years ago. These are highly capable aircraft that were purpose built for naval operations and for power projection. So these are extremely agile aircraft. They're capable of carrying a lot of weaponry. The French Navy was was the prime, the prime customer for the Rafale. So they called all the shots. It's something that's almost unthinkable in the Indian context, right? The Navy calling the shots in terms of what a piece of aircraft is going to look like. That may happen with the twin-engine deck-based fighter, but if that actually comes to a reality, I have my own doubts about that. So the Rafale M is one of perhaps two current true blue purpose-built naval fighters. The other is the F-18 Hornet or the Super Hornet, which is also currently in operations and which actually competed against the Rafale for this Indian Navy contract. So the Rafale is a fighter that operates off one aircraft carrier. The Air Force version of the Rafale, which is built by Dassault as well, has many customers. India was the first foreign customer. There have been other customers since then, Qatar and Egypt and many other countries have ordered the Rafale. But the Indian Navy, when it places this order, when it completes negotiations and places its order, will be the first export customer of the naval Rafale, the Rafale M, as you rightly said. And that's a big deal. For India to be just the second operator of that aircraft, makes it a huge validation and an affirmation of that aircraft. But it's also not surprising because remember that India operates the Rafale already. And commonality is a huge thing when it comes to defense procurement. If you have the infrastructure to support, maintain, and operate a type of aircraft, why wouldn't you want to operate more of the same type? Which would lead to the question, how similar is the Rafale M to the Air Force Rafale? There are various things that do the round. There's 60% similar, 70% similar, 80% similar. The spare parts are all the same. The line replaceable units are all the same. The aggregates, the lubricants, the maintenance procedures and protocols, they're all the same. Those are all major elements of economy and cost saving because you have one type and you don't need to completely create infrastructure for a different type of aircraft. And I think that was one of the not all, but one of the reasons why the Indian Navy chose the Rafale. But it is very important to note that that is not the only reason. The Indian Navy still went through the motions of conducting field evaluation tests of aircraft. It invited bids from countries across the world that made aircraft. Even countries that don't have naval aircraft submitted bids, which is why the Indian Navy's quest for these deck-based fighters was actually a fascinating kind of almost like a beauty contest. It was incredible. You had Sweden, which makes the Gripen Air Force fighter, propose a product called the Sea Gripen. Doesn't exist, only on paper, but for the Indian deal. Sea Gripen. You had Eurofighter, which is the Airbus and the European company, which makes the Typhoon, propose something called the Maritime Typhoon for the Indian Navy. Doesn't exist. It just exists. It only existed as a brochure aircraft. Wow. And because the Indian Navy is a force that cannot be ignored, it's a big customer. All these companies know that the Indian Navy will, because of the responsibilities that will be put on India in the years ahead because of China, the Indian Navy will become a hungrier and hungrier customer. It will need more aircraft. And therefore, all these people, literally created these concept aircraft on brochures and proposed them. But ultimately, the reality was that there are only two aircraft that can actively participate in field evaluations. And that was the Rafale M and the American F-18 Super Hornet. So the tests happened in Goa. Multiple kinds of different kinds of criteria were tested, different kinds of takeoff profiles, different kinds of weapons load profiles. All of these were taken into account, in addition to the fact that the Air Force also already operates the Rafale, which remember will also reduce your training costs. Yes. If you already have a large fleet of Rafale pilots, you don't need to go abroad to train, right? Even though the training is quite different because you're doing carrier-based training. But there are savings to be made when you have a similar kind of aircraft across the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force. And I think that's the reason why the Rafale M was chosen.
Right. We'll talk about the negotiations and, like I said, the bureaucracy, the great Indian bureaucracy when it comes to deals like these, but after a quick break.
Our childhood started watching Rahul Dravid, Saurav Ganguly, Sachin Tendulkar. So for us, it was nothing against Virat and Rohit. We all loved them. We were very emotional when they got retired. They take retirement. But for Rahul Dravid, when Rahul Dravid did the celebration, it felt like somebody released my childhood.
Yeah, pains of the childhood.
Yes, I saw you crying. I was sitting on my knees, and we were celebrating. We did not have any emotions. They were playing dhol downstairs, and we were all dancing. Remember?
Yeah.
So there is nothing which I can say more. I have just summed up everything that happened to me on that day.
You know, a lot of times when Sunil Gavaskar says there is no greater motivation than playing for the country, you kind of, okay, what is he saying? Why is he saying this? Probably a personal milestone, probably a revenge, but nothing. We all, as in this same very room, in this Sledging Room podcast, we discussed whether Ashish Nehra should be the head coach for T20 cricket.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
At that point, it looked like, okay, India are not getting the hang of especially T20 cricket.
Yeah.
We cannot generalize it as wild ball cricket. But my general feeling is, even if India had not won the World Cup, now if people might think, okay, now you can say that and all that, but even if India had not won the World Cup, the change in approach, this is how we'll play our T20 cricket. Probably England started it very early.
Absolutely.
You were not willing to catch up.
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing the Indian Navy's quest to get a new fighter jet. India has finalized the Rafale M. Negotiations still going on. So the deal could fall through, but I don't see that happening because of reasons that Shiv described just before the break, of the reasons the Navy has chosen this aircraft. One of which is the fact that you already have the Air Force using the aircraft, which would reduce a lot of your post-purchase cost of maintenance, training, etc., etc., etc. Tell us what happens in these negotiations. Who's part of it? I'm guessing there would be civilians from the finance ministry, there would be people from the defense ministry, and there would also be naval officers involved in the team. I remember there was a team that negotiated the Rafale deal, which kind of fell through during the UPA years. We'll come back to that in perhaps the next segment. But what happens in these deals? Because I came across this fanciful term known as the DPP, the Defense Procurement Procedure. So there's a laid out PDF. If anyone's interested, you can Google it. The Ministry of Defense has it on their website with chapters which describe of how a negotiating team should go about doing a negotiation for defense deals. And we can make fun of it, but that there's a reason for that, because these are huge. This is big money of public money. So there has to be obviously laid down procedures to ensure that the money is being is used well and spent well. What happens during these negotiations? Is it just about the money bit, or is it also a bit more than that?
So these are called techno-commercial negotiations, which means that there are teams on both sides which literally sit across a table in a conference room, with computers and spreadsheets and projectors and things like that, and actually incrementally hammer out what will finally become the master document that will be used to execute the contract. Now, as per my information, these negotiations began sometime at the end of May. That's when the first negotiation team from France, which was basically comprised of people from Dassault, persons from the French MOD, had come down. And similarly, the Techno-commercial negotiation committee from here in India is comprised of people from the Ministry of Defense, Department of Finance, various bureaucrats, members of the Indian Navy, like you rightly said, but also interestingly members of the Air Force, because they're the dadas of the Rafale now. They've been through the motions. They've seen the whole thing through. They know where all the issues are. They know what the negotiating points are. Even though they're not the ones who pull the strings, it's finally the MOD and the government. But they've literally been through this process. So they're there obviously as observers, advisors, and that kind of thing. So those negotiations have been happening. The intention, according to the Indian Navy, is that they hope to see a government-to-government contract being signed within this financial year, which is very ambitious. Remember, that's very ambitious. But this government has shown that when it comes to government-to-government deals, it doesn't let the grass grow under its feet. It's usually quite quick to do that. We saw that with the 2016 Rafale deal, which the Modi government, the first Modi government had signed in 2016. It happened very, very quickly, if you remember. And the fact that the Rafale has been chosen for the Navy as well, despite all the politics that was played over the Rafale in the 2019 election campaign, shows that the government, has taken a very strategic, hard stance not to bow to politics when it comes to defense deals, which is in my view a very good thing, because politics only benefits the companies; it never benefits the country. I'm very, very clear about that. The only people who would suffer because of politics over scams, alleged scams, etc., is the Navy in this case. And so the negotiations will continue in a very, very detailed manner. They go into every aspect, literally the nuts and bolts of the aircraft. The good news is, since the Indian Air Force did it just a few years ago, and is well versed in negotiating a deal of this kind, it'll be a slightly more straightforward process. Still complicated because it's a different aircraft, different deal. It's not connected to that deal because it's not a follow-on order or an options order. It's an all-new by itself order for aircraft, etc. It'll be an all-new deal, but like I said, India has, whatever you may say about the DPP and how many things India has negotiated over the years, every new negotiation is a new negotiation, believe me. So they can go very, very quickly like they did with the Rafale, or they can wind for years and years and years. I think the current record is 19 years for the Hawk trainers. That's how long things went between different countries until India signed a deal. So there is no reason to believe that this deal won't happen this year. I mean, it could slip by a year perhaps, but I don't see that happening, because it seems like all the boxes in terms of process have been ticked. So in terms of what will be negotiated will be price. What will be negotiated and confirmed will be configuration. What the India specific enhancements will be. I read a report recently by my friend and colleague Snehesh in the print, where he talks about how most of the enhancements that the Indian Navy is looking for are mostly software specific for different kinds of mission profiles, weather radar, capabilities, certain specific tweaks to what the French Rafale can do, for the specific Indian context, which is not unusual at all, which is something that the Indian Air Force has also done. There is a possibility of some additional weapons which will be obviously contracted, because remember the Indian Air Force Rafale doesn't have anti-ship missiles.
Yes.
So the Indian Navy missile, it stands to reason that there will be anti-ship weaponry and other kinds of over ocean intelligence gathering sensors, which might be part of the deal. So all of that will be negotiated. It's a very, very painstaking thing. Rooms full of papers are gone through, and a final master document will be created.
Right. A slightly tangential point on the topic of negotiations and what to me seems short-sightedness. Two things. One, why couldn't we have done the negotiation for a naval Rafale along with the Air Force Rafale, considering that you knew even then that you needed a fighter jets for your Navy? Because you said that Navy realizes more than a decade ago that, hello, our MiGs are kind of getting old. We need new fighter jets. I'm pretty sure the government must have been told. So when you had floated that ambitious MMRCA tender, which fell through, medium multi-role combat aircraft under the UPA, stand to reason that you might as well have added 40 odd fighter jets for your Navy. It would have been simpler, because same company you're negotiating with. So if you negotiate one grand deal for two different forces, I'm guessing you would have some savings. And the second point, on a similar note, is that the MMRCA has now turned into an MRFA, multi-role fighter
for 114 Air Force fighters.
Why? Why do you have to repackage that deal when you have already bought Rafale? So there is still this tantalizing possibility that you could end up with another, because Shiv has previously described the Air Force as a museum of fighter jets, and there is still a possibility that the Air Force will end up adding one more different version of fighter jet in its kitty. So why do you have this MRFA if you already are happy with the Rafale? And what happened to the naval Rafale?
Dave, you've gone to a very painful place for the Indian Navy. I'm not going to break tradition and sugarcoat my answer. The simple answer to your question over why the Air Force and Navy couldn't have negotiated one common deal and got all these aircraft as part of one deal. The simple reason is the Air Force would not ever deign to share negotiating space
Wow.
with the Navy. Okay?
Wow.
I will take what shit comes my way for having said this. And anyone who wants to argue back with me, I will eat it. The truth is, we can talk until the cows come home about jointmanship, about operating together, about theaterization, etc. But if you can't sit and figure out modernization, capacity creation, weaponization, capital acquisition in an integrated manner, then you can forget about everything else. Because what you've said makes absolute sense, and you're right. It's not like the Indian Navy has now come to know that they need these fighters. They've always known, but then they've, if sense, if the big picture and all these luxurious concepts were part of the everyday way of doing things, I think the military would have a lot of money for other things right now. The fact is, isn't how it works. I don't want to oversimplify it and say, I'm sure there are other reasons as well. There are budget priorities. There are issues of capacity utilization. There's an entire ladder of priorities in terms of what can happen, can't happen in a certain year. It's easy. I'm sure some people listening, and I'm sure officers in the Air Force are going to say, Shiv, it's very easy for you to sit there in that red chair with Dave and talk about, why can't Indian Navy and Indian Air Force just sit together and order the same aircraft? I know it's not that simple, but believe me, sometimes it is that simple. Yeah. Okay? I'm always suspicious of people who start an argument by saying it's not that simple. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because oftentimes it is. Okay? And in this particular case, you're right. It could very much have been possible. And let me make the bad news even worse. Because you've got 36 Rafales with the Air Force. You've got 26 Rafales that you're negotiating with for the Navy right now. And you've got the MRFA, which you just talked about, in which the Rafale is a contender. Mm. Now, if you have a museum of fighters, and I'm not advocating for anyone here. I'm just saying, if you have a museum of fighters, the entire point of trying to economize and make in India and create capacity here in India is about commonality and saving costs and a bang for your buck and all those wonderful things, then why is there even a contest?
Yes, exactly.
Why is there even a contest? Why are you wasting time with a contest? One part of the Air Force would say, stop all this costly, contest business. Stop wasting everybody's time. You've spent a hell of a lot of money choosing the Rafale already. You've spent a boatload of money creating infrastructure for the Rafale already. You can fool your grandfather about how this is a stopgap arrangement, but the Rafale is not a piece of aluminium. It's a bloody expensive toy. It is not a stopgap. Anyone calling the Rafale a stopgap either for the Air Force or the Navy is an idiot. It is not a stopgap. It's the most expensive stopgap in history. So if you're going to commit 80,000 crore, 50,000 crore into a stopgap, then we are not India, boss. We've stopped being India a long time ago. Yeah. So let's think about this sensibly. If you've got the Rafale for the Air Force and you're about to get it for the Navy, what is this MRFA? And this MRFA is a contest that has multiple fighters competing, yes, including the Rafale. You've got the Rafale. You've got the F-15. Fun fact, my favorite aircraft, but I still don't know what works here. When I say favorite aircraft, I mean favorite aircraft technically, not for this contract. I'm just saying, what is the point of all of this? Yeah. So it circles back to the beginning of your question, which is that why couldn't the Navy and the Air Force sit together and just negotiate this deal together? I'm saying we've got a huge deal, which is a requirement, which is about double the capacity of the number of Rafales we're already contracting. And we're still not thinking of shutting that down and saying, okay, let's save some costs and just negotiate a larger deal and make this all about the Air Force. There was a report by Shishir Gupta in the Hindustan Times a couple of days ago, which I'll bring into in more detail, about how the Dassault, the company, is now planning to acquire land in very close to where we are doing this podcast, in Jewar in Uttar Pradesh, to build an MRO facility. That's maintenance, repair and overhaul. That's what MRO stands for the Rafale, which could potentially expand into a manufacturing facility for the Rafale, which means the Dassault guys, who are obviously in it to gain something,
Of course.
are already trying to sweeten the whole thing, sweeten the picture by saying, हम Rafale बनाएंगे इंडिया में, हम खुद बनाएंगे, we'll partner with someone, we'll make the Rafale here in India. Now, if that is going to be one of the mandatory elements of this MRFA that we're talking about, which is basically supposed to be a made in India effort, then what is all this? What is all this negotiation happening? We're sitting and negotiating for 26 fighters. And let me be even more specific. It doesn't even have to be about the Rafale. It could be any other fighter.
Yeah.
It could literally be about any other fighter. But if you've already chosen, 2 governments have chosen the Rafale. 2 governments, the UPA government and then this government have chosen the Rafale. So they actually agree on the fighter, which is amazing in these times. They both agreed on the fighter. UPA government chose the Rafale, this government closed the deal. And there's no disagreement. Then you go for it then. If you had chosen a different fighter, you should have gone for that. Yeah. How many different contests are you going to have? So that's the point.
Yeah, I'm very glad with your impassioned answer, because I think the problem that the two of us have is with the contest and not with the idea of getting more jets. Because and it's not as if the Rafale did not win the contest. There was a contest, the MMRCA.
Full.
The Air Force chose the Rafale, the UP agreed with it, and the deal fell through for other reasons.
Yeah,
It was not as though we were not happy with the fighter jet, or the Boeing was better, but ye stopgap mein khareedna pada because hame urgent requirement tha. You have tested this fighter jet. You've said this is the best that we want, and everyone's happy with it. But for some reason you're gonna have this contest all over again, which makes zero sense to me. And I'm glad you brought up the part about, on a serious note, the part about, the report in Hindustan Times about Rafale, that's all, kind of looking to purchase land.
Yeah.
I think that's more of a sort of a push to the Indian government. Ki, bhai, dekho, we are
Companies do that all the time,
Yeah, because I think that would then kind of make Rafale the sort of the mainstay of the Air Force, the future mainstay of the Air Force, like the Sukhoi has been. And something struck me while I was thinking about the Sukhois and the mainstays well a bit, that how both the Air Force's mainstay, the Sukhoi, and the Navy's mainstay, the MiG-29s, were kind of aircraft that were forced on them. Because if you remember the previous episode, you told us this nice tale about how the Sukhoi 30 was kind of forced on the Air Force, even though it's a great aircraft. That's it. Right. Cool. As we bring this episode to a close, sort of give us we talked about mission profiles. We talked about that viral moment from an early episode where you said naval fighter pilots are better and cooler than the Air Force fighter pilots. I kind of sense that, you kind of did not mention that right now because you were kind of scared of, maybe, getting into that. I should just say it. That's what Shiv said in that clip that went massively viral.
Oh, believe me, you don't have to say it. Everyone knows it's out there. It's permanent on the internet now.
Right. But yeah, so I wanted to know about the mission profile of the pilots who were deployed at Ladakh. There was a point, I think a couple of years ago, when MiG-29Ks from the Indian Navy were deployed along the border with China, when the tensions with China were at an all-time high. They still are, but, kind of stabilized right now. One, why did we have to deploy fighters from the Navy? Was it that the Air Force did not have enough jets at that point, or was it some other reason? And second, I would guess that naval fighter pilots are not used to flying over mountains because you're operating at sea, so you are not rarely going to encounter mountains, and especially Indian Ocean, which is just a vast piece of ocean. So must this have been a very new sort of terrain?
You're talking about the MiG-29 pilots or the Rafale pilots?
The MiG-29 pilots.
Right.
The naval MiG-29 pilots. So would this have been completely new terrain, or have they also seen training of this kind? And what would have been the mission profile, and very crucially, why were the naval fighters there in the first place?
So look, it's a really good question, and one that hasn't been explored adequately. The answer to it is, when you're in a unpredictable conflict situation of the kind that the Eastern Ladakh situation was post Galwan, there is a kind of concept that military planners have, which is put everything at your disposal. If not put everything into the air, at least keep everything ready. Now, when you're up against a country like China, which is both very well armed, and I'm talking about in terms of numbers. Let's forget about quality. That's a faraway castle. But in terms of sheer numbers, in terms of sheer strength in squadrons, etc., and a situation which is volatile, a situation which you, as a military planner, as a country, believe could escalate into an actual exchange. Why would you not, muster all your strength towards that objective and be prepared at least? Now, look, naval fighters and naval pilots obviously have very specialized roles, but the MiG-29K is just as capable, like I said in my first answer, of functioning as a land-based fighter. In fact, when these fighters are not on their ships, they're based in Goa. They're operating off, a normal tarmac in INS Hansa in Goa. So these fighters are capable of doing that kind of thing. And remember, these fighters are similarly armed as well. These fighters have similar radars. They've got similar weapons, apart from the maritime weapons. So one half of the answer to this is that this was India basically saying, we're going to put everything into the fight, or at least put everything into a place where they will be ready for the fight. Okay, and this is an age-old doctrine. It's the Royal Air Force, especially after World War II, there was a doctrine over whether, if war is imminent, you put everything you have into the air, including trainer aircraft. They had armed trainer aircraft in order to be part of the fight. Why waste a flying asset if it can also drop a few bombs, right? So one half of the answer is that. The other half of the answer, and remember when the new Rafales first came, they were also sent immediately to Ladakh, is also that a dynamic, real-life, non-simulated conflict scenario is a highly valuable canvas to gain very, very important experience and live training.
Right.
Okay, this is not Pokhran. This is not your Mahajan field firing ranges. This is not the Bay of Bengal where you're simulating a live scenario, but you are deploying your people in a live scenario, but there's no actual fighting going on. So the missions that they're flying are practically training with real consequences, training with real effects, training, keeping an eye on the border, learning about the enemy, theoretically getting signatures and radar signatures of what they have on the other side. Whether they do or don't, we don't know. But I'm saying that's part of the entire cat and mouse game that takes place in the air. But having a real effect, you're having a deterrent effect. You're baring your fangs, you're flexing your muscle with everything you have. But your pilot's also gaining a lot of experience. I actually thought it was a fabulous idea to send your Rafales to Ladakh immediately. Brand new spanking fighters coming in from France. 18 days later, they sent to Ladakh. Which is crazy. Brand new fighters. Why would you do that? There was one section which was saying, "Arey, ye kyun kar rahe? They brand new. Why would you send them there?" It was amazing. They were there to flex. They were there to be seen. They were there to be noticed. But they were also there to soak up the terrain, soak up the enemy's signatures, soak up what the enemy aircraft are trying to do over there. And it was an amazing, very, very committed, strong message saying that we will use what we have, no matter what. So that's what this was really about. It was about, not having to segregate things. And I think the message that India also sent out, not for the world, but even for the military itself, was that all forces will operate together.
Yes.
Incredible. Naval pilots in their MiG-29Ks in Ladakh,
Imagine.
operating at high altitudes. They're built for aircraft carriers at sea level, and they're operating at 15,000 feet.
Yeah.
Fabulous. And believe me, in those few weeks that the MiG-29Ks operated there, the naval pilots would have learnt an incredible amount about their own aircraft and what they can do.
Yep.
So that's what this was about. It's an opportunity to train in a real conflict scenario also.
Yeah, right. I'm really glad we touched upon that, because I think, and also it once again highlights something that I've realized as I speak to, you in this season and Abhishek Bhalla in a previous season, is in hindsight, we keep, like speaking to defense journalists like you, I keep just getting a sense of just how close to war we were with China.
Yeah.
That's something that I think media reports did not manage to highlight enough. But answers that you gave right now, that's quite chilling to know that the military was like, bhai, we need to send everything to the border right now.
Absolutely.
So that was like, that's literally it. I mean, uske baad there's war. There's nothing else after that.
And let's remember that the Rafales are still there.
Yeah.
There's a detachment of Rafales that went there in 2020, which are still there.
Yes.
And the Apaches are still there in Ladakh. So that hasn't changed.
Yeah, that hasn't changed. Right. We'll end this episode on that note. Thanks, Shiv. Fantastic
Thanks,
chat
Dave.
with you. And I loved, like I said, the impassioned answer towards the end about the mismanagement of the deal procurements that's in India. But I think that's going to be a continuing theme on in our defense. Thanks also to our producer Anna Priyadashani, and thanks to our viewers and our listeners. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries of the passport. Bye bye.